Doom, Blood, Quake, Duke Nukem, Shadow Warrior. I'm sure if you're watching this, you've at least heard of those series. They're classics, icons, legends, each in their own right, beloved by most people who play games. But what do they have in common? Well, obviously they're all FPS games, first-person shooters, of course. But I think we all know there's a major and obvious difference between this versus this. See, Duke Nukem, Doom, Quake, Shadow Warrior, etc. are what we call boomershooters, and they aren't alone. There's so many. There's Half-Life, the absolute game changer, Marathon, the forgotten older brother, Heretic and Hexen, the fantasy couple, Turok, the Dead series, Rise of Triad, lateral thinking made into a game, Serious Sam, just a fuck ton of explosions, and Sin, the one I've never played. And of course, Wolfenstein, the grandfather of them all. But that leads me into my next part. I think most, if not all, series, or groups of series, can be broken up into the same way comics are, with ages. Platinum, golden, and silver, and also apparently bronze and modern, which I'm only learning about while reading this right now. See, the golden age was when DC and Marvel showed up on the scene and then really came into their own. And the silver age came after that, of course, and so on and so forth. But what about the platinum age? Well, what came before the rise of Batman and DC? Well, the funnies. Simple comics with not much substance. Now, I'm not trying to take a dig at all one of the funny fans, but let's be real here, they were just for a laugh and a half, and not much more. And there's nothing wrong with that. But therein lies, inside the Platinum Age, a very special comic. Dick Tracy. And for the more comic literate of you, I think you can probably see where this is going. See, Dick Tracy was one of the first comics to really start to look and feel like what was coming next. Wacky for sure, but it had some real plots, solid actual characters, and action. It sits between the eras, really. Without it, the Golden Age may have never happened. And this is where we transition back to shooters. I think we can all agree that Doom would be the start of the Golden Age of FPS. It's been called the father of all shooters. It's the action comics #1 of first-person shooters. But like all Golden Age comics, what came before? Well, Wolfenstein. You see, I feel much like comics like Dick Tracy and others, Wolfenstein sits right in between the eras, really. Without Wolfenstein, there'd be no Doom, and without Doom, there'd be no Boomershooter, you know? But Wolfenstein surely does share a lot of aspects with those Platinum-era shooters. But we don't talk about those because they scare me. But the aspects of those are a little more vague, such as them generally just being kind of bad, and a tad bit tanky, excessively so. But as with every spectrum, there's always something on the opposite end of it. And that takes us into... Here is where the video comes to a head. Halo Combat Evolved, I feel, is at the opposite end of the spectrum to Wolfenstein. And that leads me to the question, what is a boomershooter? I'm using Halo as a base here, but this question can be applied to a lot of games. So here we go. I've seen this argument a few times, and both sides have made very good reasons on why it is or isn't a boomershooter. Hell, I've joined in on the conversation, and I came to the conclusion that I think it is a boomershooter. But I'm not here to just say, yeah it is, here's the answer, video done, because really, I have no idea. I really don't. What the hell makes us decide what is and isn't a boomershooter? Now here's some of the arguments. Halo CE is a boomershooter. Well, it has many of the telltale signs of a boomershooter. Fast-paced gameplay and action, enemies that serve a very distinct purpose, a cool character, ability pickups, and health packs, with very purposeful weapons with distinct uses and tactics. Now, here is Halo CE is not a boomer shooter. Well, it has many of the telltale signs of the Silver Age shooters. While it's fast, it's a mite bit slower than Doom or Quake. It also has a massive focus on the story, even more than Half-Life. It has vehicles and third-person turrets. And I mean real vehicles, not that stuff that was in Shadow Warrior, no. And yeah, it has health packs, and yeah, they're important, but not nearly as important as they are in the other boomer shooters, due to your recharging shield. And its placement on the FPS timeline would make it the equivalent of Wolfenstein, yeah. And if we consider Wolfenstein a boomer shooter, then shouldn't we consider Halo a Silver Age shooter? Especially seeing as, like, half of the Silver Age is filled with Halo killers. Now, these are both sound arguments, and yet they both have their flaws, because they're both kind of bad. But what if there was another way you could determine what is and isn't a boomer shooter? And what if that way only further complicates things? So, what other way could you determine a boomer shooter? Maybe it should be an amount of time. But where does that amount of time start and end? When Halo CE was released? What about Half-Life 2? Is that when it ends? Because I suppose that's a fitting end, because on the same day Half-Life 2 was released, a pretty by-the-numbers World War II shooter came out. Huh, damn, what was that called again? Medal of... No. Oh yeah, Call of Duty Finest Hour. The bane of all overly dramatic Boomershooter fans. But maybe time doesn't matter, or rather it shouldn't. Would you want to leave the newcomers out in the rain, the Dusks, the Ultra Kills? But wouldn't that just take us back to style again? You know, gameplay, speed, all that. Which would be pretty cut and dry, like, oh, that's the obvious answer. But then you have games like Half-Life 2, and let's be honest, that's not as fast as its polygonal predecessor. But hey, that's only one aspect of the game. There's loads of other boomer shooter stuff, like a heavy emphasis on physics puzzles and massive vehicle sections. Yeah, I remember all of those in Quake too. Great times. Obviously, I'm being a bit hyperbolic here. There's actual gameplay similarities with the rest of the boomer shooters, but I stand by saying if a game that came out with the same level beats and design as Half-Life 2 without the connection to Half-Life, I have doubts people would go, yes, this is in the same category as Doom. And even after saying all of that, I'd still feel weird calling Half-Life 2 anything but a boomer shooter. So maybe it's as long as your game is still an FPS and also came from the era of boomer shooters, maybe that will grandfather you in. But then, let's say Halo CE is a boomer shooter. Would you really call this a boomer shooter? I don't think so. Yeah, so after all of that, I still really have no idea. Just this did not answer anything. It is more a question to anybody who sees this. You got any ideas? Maybe the Silver Era should have started with Quake. Maybe we should stop using the term boomer shooter because it's not it's not very marketable, honestly. Maybe hey, Quake had the 3D and the bunny hops. Maybe that's a whole whatever. I mean, like the term, the boomer shooter term is so loose. Like this part's just not even scripted. We consider generally we lump Postal in with that, and that was originally an isometric shooter. Like, that has nothing to do with this, and but I mean, I have no qualms with it being like associated with it. It just is, and I don't know. Okay, so the video's over.